Okay, so do I have your permission, Jonathan, to record your teaching demonstration and share it widely?
Yes, that's fine.
Ben?
Yes.
And Peach?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's go ahead and start with Ben. Ben is going to be teaching from the R novice inflammation lesson, which is also called Programming with R. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a start point for you, Ben, and then I'll give you a minute to get everything set up, and we'll go from there. So let's have you start with creating functions. I'll go ahead and paste the link into the Etherpad and give you a moment to get your screen set up. And when you're ready, please start screen sharing.
Okay.
And I forgot to mention earlier when I was going through logistics, everyone, when it's not your turn to speak, please mute your audio. You can do that on the right hand of the BlueJeans pane.
Sorry, just taking a moment to get everything beautiful. Okay, I think I'm ready to start.
Okay, go ahead and share your screen, Ben.
Yep. Get myself back to the, okay, share screen, sharing options, RStudio, start sharing. Is that working?
Yes.
See something here?
We can see your RStudio window, yes.
Okay. All right. So the next topic we're going to cover is defining functions. And this is a little bit tricky, but it's one of the most important pieces in setting up your data analysis and your workflow so that it's really clean and organized and you can come back and understand it. I'm going to start by defining a function, what we want the function to do. We already know that we have some piece of analysis we want, and in this case, we want to automate the process of converting a Fahrenheit temperature to a Kelvin temperature. I'm going to be working in the command window, in a script window here. So I'm actually creating a text file as I'm going along. And then when I want to test something, I can easily automatically paste it into the R console here. So I could, if I have a variable called Kelvin, I can go ahead and look up or remember the formula for converting it to, if I have a Fahrenheit temperature, so I will add this little comment, temperature in Fahrenheit. If I have a temperature, and I know it's 45 degrees in Fahrenheit, I can define that variable. So I've just hot pasted from my script window to the console. And then if I want to run this command just once, I can run that and do that calculation and figure out what the answer is. But I probably want to do that more than once. I probably want to do that over and over again. So I'm going to take the same thing, the same set of actual numerical computations, and I'm going to define a function that runs that command. What I'm doing is taking my function and I'm embedding it. I'm putting, this is called the body of the function. I'm putting it inside curly brackets. I'm telling R that this is a function and that it has an argument called temp. I'll get to that. I'll explain that a little bit more in just a moment. And I will define the name of the function as far2 Kelvin. When I paste this, so take a breath and think about what you think is going to happen when I paste this or copy this into my console. And now I'm going to do it, and nothing happens, or apparently nothing happens. It doesn't say 280.3. It doesn't give me an error. Now, if you remember from the shell lessons, not giving you an error might just mean, okay, I did that, that worked. What do you want me to do next? What I have now, if I look at the things I have in my environment, I have that Kelvin variable and the temperature variable that were left over from that experiment from that playing around I was doing, and I have an object called farad to Kelvin. So there's a new thing in my workspace. The way that I use that new thing is I type out farad to Kelvin, and then I put the temperature I want to convert inside as what's called the argument to that function. So the argument is the particular temperature that I want to convert this time. Now, if I run this, now that's interesting. I left something out. I don't make the mistakes on purpose, but they're educational when I make them. I forgot to tell R that I want to return that variable. So I did the computation, but I never said, when you run this function, what do you want to get back from it? Just modifying the function up here, however, doesn't help. I actually have to redefine the function. So I take that thing that I defined and I update the definition by pasting the new function into the RStudio console window. Now when I type farad to Kelvin of 45 again, now it prints out 280.3722. And if I run that function for a different input, it does the calculation for, it gives me a different answer. It gives me now the Kelvin value of 56 degrees. Now I'm about to jump into a deeper level discussion of what's actually happening here. Do you want me to keep going?
That's 5 minutes. I was just about to stop you. Thanks, Bob. So go ahead and stop screen sharing.
Good point. Thank you. Stop sharing. Poof.
Okay, great. So why don't you get us started with some feedback on yourself then?
So I almost certainly went too quickly. Part of that is just weird high pressure setting, wanting to squeeze in stuff. I think in a real setting, I would be watching the audience more and getting more feedback as I went along. But in this case, I just got a little bit of tunnel vision. I think it might be better in something where I got to teach for more than 5 minutes at a time. I made a mistake. I thought I did a reasonable job dealing with the mistake. I don't know. There's a deeper level of technical stuff that I decided not to get into on the fly about actually it did return a value, but it's invisible because no. So yeah, I probably went too quickly, but I thought I spoke clearly. I tried not to, I don't think I said just or obviously or clearly or any idiot could see that. I thought I motivated it reasonably well. Yeah, except for the tunnel vision and the going too fast, I don't know of any obvious problems with that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ben. Can we get some feedback from the other members of the audience?
Sure, Ben, I thought you enunciated really clearly, which is something that not all instructors do particularly well. So I definitely appreciate it.
Okay.
I noticed that you would type out the command and then explain the command, even if it was a long one. And sometimes I've found that it can be better to like be explaining kind of as you type, so that they see like as you're hitting the action, like that's what this one does, this one does. So they have that linear process instead of the retroactive process. But that was the only thing I thought you recovered well from the mistake. I actually thought it was a good chance for like a learning opportunity. Like never underestimate making a mistake in front of people and having a chance to show them that like
It happens.
a lot of mistakes. I think that's the crux of coding, and getting that across to people is important. They understand like you will make typos, you will spend lots of time trying to figure out where that missing parentheses was that you have buried somewhere and you can't find it anymore.
I could have mentioned that that's a particular mistake that I make all the time.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I figured out what it was so quickly, because I've been there 6,000 times. But
I think that's great. Thanks Jonathan. Avish?
No, I think that, I echo Jonathan that you were very clear in your speaking, which is really, really good. The thing that I guess I would comment on is when you're scripting and then just, hot pasting it back in using the keyboard shortcuts, it may be worth reminding people at the beginning of the lesson what you're doing, because it might appear to be magic.
Yeah.
As opposed to it's just Control Enter or Command Enter, whichever your thing is. That's the only thing that I would have suggested, at least the first time you did it, saying, I'm actually hitting Control Enter, and that's what's moving it.
You can do this too. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Erin. What are your thoughts?
I thought those were all really good points. I thought, like Jonathan, you spoke really clearly. It was a little bit fast, but it wasn't terribly fast. I've seen faster. And I did like what you did with the mistake. I agree with what both you and Jonathan said about maybe emphasizing the mistake even more. Say, I've been doing this for how many years and I still forget to return values. So I thought that was a good opportunity that you used well. I think that Jonathan mentioned it's nice to explain what you're doing as you're typing it. One of the nice things that does is it actually slows you down. Because you have to be doing two things at once. So that can be a really good way of helping you slow down. And then, no, I thought it went really, really well. There were things that I would probably extrapolate on as you went forward, not necessarily in the 5 minutes, but how do you know what's a good name for your function? When you did the ls command to list the variables in your environment, I'm not sure if they've seen that before. So that might be good.
That crossed my mind, but
especially if they've had the shell lesson before this and they're used to ls showing their directories, and they might get confused about what. So I thought that was an interesting opportunity to show kind of similarities and differences. And then there was one other thing I wrote down SC in parentheses, but I forgot what it meant. Anyway, I thought that it went really well. So, sorry. The one other thing was your environment that you were using for your RStudio. I know that there's been a lot of discussion on Discuss and stuff about what the right setup for the RStudio environment is. So all I would say is make sure if you're using something that's different than out-of-the-box environment, you spend the first episode getting everybody set up with the same environment.
Yep.
Can I just make a quick comment with that ls? Since you are using RStudio, you do have the environment window in RStudio, and you could have just pointed to it, which may be a more familiar environment for a lot of students who are used to Windows.
No, that's fair. There's and that part of the reason that this giant discussion happened on the Discuss list is that you take up a lot of real estate, especially actually in this weird artificial situation where I need all of my screen real estate. You use up a lot of. I just minimized that because I didn't want to. Anyway, doesn't matter. That is a good point. It's also a nice illustration of you can get this information in two different ways. There's a kind of programmy way to do it, and there's a GUI way to do it, and they both work.
Yes, and showing those multiple representations is usually good to show that you can see it in the environment pane and using LS. But I do remember the conversation about green real estate, and you got to play with what you got. Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much, Ben.
All right.
Let's go ahead and move on to. I'm sorry. I know I'm massacring your name. Could you repeat for me?
Okay, so so think of it as OVIJIT, so Ovijit.
Ovijit. Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to go with Ovijit, and we're going to do R for reproducible scientific analysis. And I'd like you to please do seeking help. So I'm going to paste this into the Etherpad. And go ahead and get your environment set up.
One sec here to figure out my own screen real estate here as well. So, okay, so let's see here.
I was really afraid you were going to have me do the call stack or some, obscure lesson from lesson 19, episode 19 or something.
Sure.
One of the reasons I wanted to get this recording posted is it's a common misconception among people who are getting ready to do the teaching demo that we're trying to trip you up on content. Yeah. We're really trying to see your teaching style.
Oh, I know.
So.
Okay. So let me share my screen here. Let's see if this. Let my own screen sort of rationalize here, so you can see my RStudio, which should have sort of the two big black boxes, and then there's little bits of the other panels.
Yes, okay. We can see that.
Okay.
Oh, now we can't anymore. There it is. Would you mind making it larger, though?
That's fine. I can do that. How about that?
Great. That's perfect.
Okay, fantastic. So let me start. So one of the nice things in R in general is the fact that there is fairly good documentation about most of the functions you will use, both in the base R as well as in packages that you might end up using. So the typical way of finding a function is, funnily enough, a question mark. So for example, we've showed earlier that we can read a file using read CSVs, but there are other options perhaps that we might want to know, but are we forgotten what the syntax is for it? So we can just do question mark read CSV, and if I hit enter with the RStudio, I'm just going to pick this up. It opens up a help window, which gives the gory details of this function. So what we're realizing that we did read CSV in for some reason. We have read.table. So as we find out, read.csv is a special form of read.table, and it gives the gory details of all the possible options you might want at some point to use, but it also gives the defaults for the different options. So this is a way of sort of reminding yourself of the order and the options that you might have. However, it's very common that you may forget what the particular function is. So you can also, and I do this all the time because sometimes there's some obtuse names for functions. If you do two question marks and just do CSV, it'll look through, and as you can see, it will give you a listing of everything that's installed for you that might have something to do with, CSV. If you're not, we probably aren't familiar with this format here. it refers to the package name and then 2 colons and then the function. Because as you know in R, there you can import or use different packages that users have created or that are within base R. And so this identifies both the package as well as the function that's within that package. The other way that we can so there's 2 ways you can open up the help system. One I showed you is with the question mark. The other is just being explicit, just like a function saying help read.csv. And the one thing you will notice as I was doing that I don't have to actually use the quotation marks all the time. I can literally do help read.csv, and if I just don't use the RStudio prompts, you'll see I get the same results. So this is an example of some sort of convenience, but also if you're from a computer science background, some irritant of 2 ways of doing the same thing. But regardless, the important part is to use, there's all the R functions that you'll use are documented, and it's actually something that's required from any function that's exposed that you can use directly. As part of the way R is set up. So the other thing to realize, to see here, is that you can get help not just for a function, but for packages. I'm showing this to you in RStudio, where you have a packages window and you can go down and say, open up a particular package documentation. We will use dplyr in a later module. So let me just show you a typical help screen for a package. And it gives you a listing of all the functions that you can use from that package. And clicking on any of them, let's see here. We'd be using group by later, so I'm just going to show this as an example, and we'll come back to it later in a subsequent module. It does the same thing. So when you click on it, you get back that help screen with all the details and various links to other potential things you might want to look at, as well as examples. So the thing that I find most useful in the R help system are the examples, because oftentimes I learn by mimicry. And if I don't exactly know how a function works, I will try each of these out and try and understand what it does. And that's really how I've always used the help system myself, is to try and understand the examples that the authors provide in order to be able to use it myself.
Okay, so that's 5 minutes. Thank you, Vijay.
Sure.
And go ahead and stop screen sharing, please. All right. So would you? Yes, perfect. Would you like to go ahead and get us started with some feedback for yourself?
Yeah, my usual ums and uhs show up, and that's often an artifact of trying to go slower than I normally speak, as you realize I speak quickly. The other thing, I think some of the things that went well was sort of referring back to my own experience as an R programmer and how I actually use the help system as opposed to just using it as a reference. And there's actually utility in scrolling down and finding out what's going on. The help module is fairly early in the lesson, and so I had to refer to packages that I will deal with later, and just talking about this a packaging system. And some people who have R know it, and I might have jumped the gun on it to some extent by talking about packages. But the fact that you can look at packages and sort of drill down was something that I use a bit, and I had to go, and I did that because I did the apropos, the double question marks, and it gives you a package colon function format by default, and sort of leads to that question of packages. So I think most of that went reasonably well. I don't know how my speaking came across. I'm always curious about that because I listen to myself and I don't know how I'm perceived. But yeah, welcoming other comments.
Thank you, Vijay. Jonathan or Ben?
Sure. I thought you got a nice deep voice, and I thought it came across well. One thing I would suggest is probably like vary your inflection a little bit more, because I think over the course of like a few hours, that's going to become
robotic.
It's going to
Yeah.
get a little monotone. So like having a little bit more inflection, but I thought you went at a pretty good pace. I didn't feel like you were going too fast.
Okay.
Obvious that you were kind of slowing yourself down there. There were a couple times in which you kind of paused.
Yeah.
And they were pretty long, and it was like you were kind of looking for the next example. So that would be something like kind of this is a time session, and I got it at the last second. But like knowing which in the list you want to go to kind of ahead of time, so you're not kind of scrolling back and forth and like looking, saying like, well, let's find one.
Okay. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I usually try to have like I'm gonna click on this one when I get to this point, so that we can go like directly down there. So that
the one comment I'll make with the monotone is that I've done webinars before, and I get that monotone because it's just one-sided. In a classroom setting, you get a lot more conversational and intonation.
Yeah, and you looked very focused because of the context, and so I was like, he's probably not like this when he's in the classroom, because you're like staring at the screen. And I was like, yeah, he's got his eye on the prize.
Well, it's the challenges of the webinar format, right? There's no direct interaction or feedback, and especially with the screen sharing, my entire screen is our studio, and I can't even see you guys per se. Yeah. So that's what that is. Ben?
Oh yeah, I would agree that your vocal presentation works well, but I think the ums and ahs might bother you more than they bother us, because because you're listening for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the things that I want to quibble with are actually things about the material, and are actually things about people who've been using R for a long time have very strong opinions about things.
Sure.
So they're not necessarily even you. It's sort of, oh, well, you're following the script. A couple things I would say, when you go, and I really liked, by the way, I thought your actually tie back to the packages and explaining the double colon notation was really nice. When you open up your list of packages, and you have 400 packages installed on your computer, you might want to just comment, oh, by the way, I have a whole bunch of packages. You might only have 27.
Yeah, makes sense.
I'm going to go to one that we all have to look at.
Right, or one, that's why I refer to one that we're going to be seeing later today.
Yeah,
I mean, that's fair.
I mean, again, that's a very small thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll just mention them, but most of these are things that I think might just have to do with very particular feelings about how one presents this material. I would actually warn people a little bit more that the documentation's not always easy to read. And that's delicate, because you don't want to scare them off, but you don't want them to think, oh, I'm going to go to this documentation and it's going to be really friendly and obvious, because it's not always.
And it's very uneven.
That's a tough call. I actually thought you might have pointed out when you were in our studio, and it gives you tab completion on the help.
Right.
That's actually a nice quick way to see what you might be looking for. You start to type read, and it kind of says, well, what do you want to read?
Table, CSV,
yeah. That's pretty much it. And I don't know whether it's worth going over the structure of the help page more, rather than just you bounce down to the examples. You kind of said, well, there's some arguments, and let's look at the examples. And it's hard to know, again, how much time to spend saying, here's all the bits of a help page.
Right.
I don't know.
I mean, that's sort of, I think that, as you're saying, Ben, I think correctly, that's a philosophic argument that we can have. I was trying to reflect the way I use the help system as a personal, for instance, it may not be what everyone else experiences. Sometimes, my point is that the examples are the most useful. Sometimes I need the particular options. stuff like that. I mean, I've had the most egregious one read CSV is when I get a European data set and the commas and periods are reversed. Right, in terms of what's a delimiter for thousands.
Good
So
old
stuff like
CSV
that.
too.
Yes, of course. But that's sort of fair comments, Ben. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And Aaron?
Yeah,
As a
I really enjoyed that take on the help lesson. I have had a couple of different teaching demos with the help lesson. I liked your take on it. I particularly liked your focus on read.csv and on the dplyr package, because those are actually things that you're going to be using in the lesson, as opposed to some of the examples that are given in the actual module as it's written. So I liked those choices. I liked the way that you spoke about seeking help. I do this all the time. I learn by mimicry. I really like, as carpentry instructors, giving the true appearance of lifelong learners. And I still use help documentation. Might be a revelation to people in the audience that you still use help documentation. So I think that's a good thing to emphasize. I liked Ben's comment about emphasizing the kind of obtuseness of some of the help documentation. And I think that one way to deal with that might be to have already prepared an example where you go into Google and you type in, like, I looked at the read.csv examples and I can't figure out what they mean, so I'm going to type this specific thing into Google that you happen to know is going to yield some useful information, and show them, alternative ways of finding information outside of the documentation. Because the documentation can be very difficult to parse for people who don't have a computer science background. But I really liked your take on it. Good job.
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Okay, so Jonathan, let's go ahead and get you started. I think what I'd like to see is finding things in the Unix shell. So I'm going to paste in the link here into the Etherpad. And go ahead and get your screen set up.
So this is one of those that has a set of files that come along with it. Just want me to kind of create those.
So I think it only has one, and the first step is catting that file. So I think you'll be okay. The first step in the lesson is cat hi. Oh, I see. Yeah, so go ahead and just make the hiq.txt file and then go from there.
So you can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay. So something I do generally when I teach is have the lesson along with it, so people can be kind of like looking up at the board as they go. I don't know if that's something other people do or if it's like generally not recommended, but, and if not, you can tell me. But so, hello. For this lesson, we're going to be talking about finding things at the command line and using a few of the Unix shell's built-in tools for locating different files and directories. So, generally when you go to search for something, you guys are probably used to typing things into Google. It's a little bit more difficult at the Unix command line, but luckily we have some tools that help us do that. And the first one that I'm going to be going over today is grep. And before we can really get into what grep does, we need to have a file to actually search for things for. So we're going to move first to our home directory, and that's the change directory command. And you remember, if you type it with no arguments, it will take you back to your home directory. And you can see that's kind of where we're at here because we have the little tilde symbol that we talked about in one of the previous lessons. But from there, we're going to go into the writing folder that we have created in the previous lesson. So we're doing the change directory command again, and we're adding the writing folder. And in this folder, as you remember, we created a file that has some haikus. Those haikus are in a file called haiku.txt. And we are going to kind of cat out that file now. So we have cat, which, as you recall, will just output the contents of that file. And we put in as our argument haiku.txt. When we hit that, you can see we've got 3 haikus. I think if you kind of look into the lesson, they talk about them being from Salon, and they're all programming related. I really appreciate the second one as someone who went to graduate school about the thesis. So we've got a file, we've got some text. Now the question becomes, how do we find information that is in those files, or find the types of files themselves? So we're going to use a command called grep. So the first kind of example of this is we're going to look for the word not in the file haiku. So the first command is grep. The second argument is going to be the word or the string that we're looking for. So in this case, the word not. And then we're going to pass it an argument, and we're going to pass it haiku.txt. And that's telling it to search for the word not in the file haiku.txt. And it's going to be looking, remember, in our current working directory. So when we type that in, we hit enter, we can see we get some lines back. So we get is not the true tau until, and then it skips some lines, and we have my thesis not found. You'll notice 3 lines were returned. All 3 of them contain the word not. So far, kind of a success. So we're going to try this again with another output. We're going to type in the same grep command, and we're going to type the word the, and once again pass it our argument of haiku.txt. This time we only get 2 lines. The tau that is seen, and my thesis not found. Now, if you look at this, the word the technically is not in that second line. We have my thesis not found. So what's actually happened is we found the string of characters, capital T-H-E, and those are showing up in the word thesis. So right now, grep is not really discerning. It's just going through the text. It's just looking for specific letters that match our arguments that we're putting in. So now we're going to search for, we want exactly this character. So we're going to add more arguments to it. So once again, we've got grep, and then we're going to pass a parameter of w. Type in the again, and tell it what file we're looking into, haiku.txt again. And you can see now my thesis is not showing up. And that's because we've told it, pay attention to the spaces that are in the text, look for words that are self-contained, as opposed to just finding these strings of characters. So this is, when you start getting into grep and using this as a tool for finding things, this is one of those tools where the different kinds of options that you can bring in are very important for narrowing down exactly what it is you want to look for. So if you're looking for certain words, you want them to be case sensitive, case insensitive, you're going to start using these different arguments like the -w. And we're going to kind of continue doing that as we go. So what if we want to search for multiple words? We've got that command line, but as you recall, when we're working on the Unix shell, spaces are a part of a command. So like if you put a space between something, it's telling it, now maybe you're looking for something else. Now you're looking for an argument or an option or something along those lines. If you want to search for a sentence, that makes things more difficult. So the next example we're going to look at, I'm going to type in grep once again. We're going to tell it to only look for things that we're abiding by the spaces. We're looking for something exact. And this time we're just going to put what we want in double quotation marks. And this way we're saying, look for this string that we've delineated right here. And we're once again going to pass it haiku.txt as the file to search. And you can see that today it is not working, has shown up.
Okay, that's 5 minutes. Thanks, okay. Jonathan. Go ahead and stop screen sharing. And why don't you go ahead and get us started with some feedback?
Probably knowing me went too fast. I'm always a terrible judge at that, of my own pacing. Whenever I get up in front of a classroom, my brain just kind of has a tendency to rattle off. I have a tendency to move my hands, and I've been trying not to be too out here, but also not, I was a little bit in here. And that was mainly because I didn't want to go off the cameras and stuff like that, but trying to like be active in motion, but not be distracting. I don't know how well I did at that. That's one of those things too, that it's hard to judge yourself because you're trying to focus on what you're doing. I thought I did a pretty good job of explaining each command as I was going through, what we were doing, why we were doing it. I could probably go a little bit more into like -W, but I generally don't have a tendency to do that because there's a ton of those options that I don't know what they mean, and like I'm never going to remember them, and all I need to know is like what the letter is that I'm going to put in there. I don't know how important that is, so that's one of those personal things that I probably should do, and I don't know if that's something that other people do a lot and they find it valuable, or if it's something that's particularly valuable for beginners and I'm just not seeing it because I don't use them or care necessarily what each one does. Like some of them are obvious, but some of them maybe not as much, like the W white space and all that kind of thing. I could probably go on, but I'm interested to hear what other people have to say.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan.
I've got a couple of comments. One of them is sort of making the point that with a single word, of course, it's optional, but it's probably good practice to put your patterns within quotes, just generally, so that you don't, it's not do it only when you have multiple words is actually true every time. It's just probably good practice. And the fact that single and double quotes work equally well, as long as they're matched. That's just sort of basic things because suddenly you're coding and you're not, and just making it uniform. It's a problem with the way the lesson is written, I'll admit, and that might be something that I might put a pull on just to point that out later. But that's one thing to think about just as a novice user of grep and telling why are you coding and why are you not coding. I think, as you pointed out, you could probably slow down a bit. The other challenge, and I think it's a challenge just of the format and of using shell, is the fact that when you start doing a bunches of commands on that shell window, if someone missed what you did, coming back to it is actually very confusing because all of these sort of blend together. And I'm not sure what the right solution for that is. I think that's just a general challenge of that shell window and how things work. Because I was thinking that if someone was distracted and missed and you went down 2 commands and you looked up, it's going to be very hard to figure out what you did just because of the format. And I don't know the answer to that.
Well, and I was whether or not that's something a lot of people do when they teach the shell command, or is like clear every 3 or 4 commands just so they have a fresh window so that they're not getting that. Because I agree with you, that looks intimidating, especially if you got distracted by something on your phone and you just came back to it. It's a block of text up there. And is that something that people do? Aaron, you might be able to speak to that, or Ben, if that's clearing on a regular basis. I agree with your other. I always use the double quotes or single quotes when I'm typing reps. So telling people like I just recommend doing this all the time would probably be good advice.
So, Abhijit, are you done? Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So as far I do tend to clear like when I'm going on to a new topic. So I might not clear, and because if you clear too often, then somebody's really screwed when they get distracted, because then they have no history. It can also help there if you have enough lines on the screen, it can actually help to hit enter a couple times to just leave a little bit of visual space between. I thought your pacing was actually very good. I thought, making the little analogy to Google, and I thought, again, I thought the presentation was actually was really approachable. I liked that you started with the review of, okay, now remember, and if you don't remember, I'm reminding you that we're going to our home directory and then we're moving down. So that repetition is always good, and you did that a couple other times. A couple of one thought when you do the first grep, I might actually go back and highlight those lines in the printout. So you've got those lines, you've just done the cat, and you can actually point to them, because it's a little hard to take those 3 lines. You end up kind of searching back and forth and going, oh, those lines are in that block of text, but I don't see where they are. So it might, or maybe just the first one. Yes, I promise this actually is in here. And I liked your distinction between words and strings. I thought that was very nice. I started getting distracted by case sensitivity. When you put up capital T, I started thinking, okay, is he going to talk about case sensitivity or not? Or maybe he's going to come back to that. And then you actually said case sensitive and insensitive, and you didn't say what it was. And so I was like, oh, what if has this been, I don't know whether it's covered previously, but that's certainly, I think that, and I don't know if it's in the lesson there or not, but I think that's definitely a teachable moment about, you might look for the, but wait, why did it get this the and not that the? Oh, this one is uppercase.
Yeah, it comes later in the session. I kind of jumped.
Okay,
I was thinking about it because I was like, I might get to that one, so I want to like have a transition into it. But I did agree. I probably brought it up too early. Like it is. I think it's the next or a couple things down that you go over is like how to make it case insensitive versus sensitive using commands and stuff like that.
The only other thing I had to say, the way that I deal with all the options thing is I tell the students, I say, there's a whole bunch of options, and I remember 3 or 4 of them that I use all the time, and somebody else has an overlapping but distinct set of 3 or 4 that they use, and I'll be looking over somebody's shoulder and go, grep minus Q, what's that? And they'll say, oh, that's blah blah blah. I go, oh, that's really useful. I never knew about that. It's just another kind of reminder to them that this is a giant world and nobody actually knows all of it. They just learn the bits that work for them.
Yeah, I like that. And I kind of what I'm hearing, and I agree with it, is that I should probably do a little bit more about like me as a coder and like what I'm doing and like my practices and stuff like that. I could definitely see that. And talking about, when I do LS, it's always LS, LAH. Like, why bother with just plain old LS? Like, it's not worth, like, so, like, there are these commands that, and the options that you remember, and those are the ones that make most sense to you, and you like the output or whatever you get from them. I think talking about that a little bit more instead of just lesson. I mean, I think both personalizes it and gives that sense of like, here's an actual use and how coders use it, how people use it out in the world, type of thing. I think that's valuable.
And it gives them, again, it says everybody has a different style and you have permission to remember the bits that are work for you.
Yeah.
That's all I had to say. I thought it was good. Thank you.
Just a couple of thoughts as Ben was talking. One, going back to my point about sort of the sheet of text. One thing that the software carpentry session that I actually attended is they simplified their prompts, which may be something to think about for that session. Is not use your normal prompt because you wouldn't want that information, but to make it simplified.
Yeah, this is my work computer.
No, I know.
I know. So it actually looks a lot different. Normally, I actually kind of toned it down a little bit.
I understand. I mean, we're all geeks about our prompts, and I get that. So that's one thing. The other thing that I realized is when you first did cat, you didn't say what cat does. I mean, it may have come before, but a reminder would have been good, saying cat's just printing out the file, or whatever the right thing is for you to. So when you said cat, you said we will cat this file as a verb.
Yeah.
And maybe it's worth mentioning what cat does.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I'm just gonna burst in here because we have 2 minutes left, and I have another teaching demo right after this. I think those are all really good points. I think that does come earlier in the lesson. Jonathan, I think you did a really good job in general about reminding people stuff that had happened in previous lessons. I really liked the way that you did that. And people tend to shy away from that because they feel like they're being repetitive, but repetition can be a really good thing for novice learners. I thought your pace started out excellent, and then the last 30 seconds or so, I feel like you were trying to get one more thing into your 5-minute slot. But you had a really good pace at the beginning, so just try to remember not to rush. And then I think that having the lessons up on the screen was something I hadn't seen before. I like it so long as the problem with having the lessons up on the screen is that it limits you to following the lessons piece by piece, which in some cases is good, but if there's any problems with the lessons, like the fact that some of the grep patterns are in quotes and some aren't, then you run into issues where you're introducing cognitive load because the learners are seeing something different on the lessons than they're seeing in your terminal. So one way to fix that is to do a fork and have it exactly the way that you're going to be doing it. But then if you go off on a tangent, they get lost again. One way that I've seen get around that problem is if you have a helper in your room, have them transcribe all of the commands into the Etherpad as they're going through and maybe write a short description of what's going on in each of those so that people can catch back up. I know I've done that before as a helper. And then the other thing that I liked was have a couple of, hit enter a couple of times and have a few blank lines in your terminal window. I definitely don't recommend doing clear frequently because it has the potential to really frustrate people if they can't see what's been going on. Yeah, I liked the fact that you resisted all of our tendency to clear the screen because I know you were probably itching to hit clear. Yeah, but I liked it. I thought it went really well. So I do have to go to the next teaching demo. I wanted to thank everyone for doing your teaching demo today and for letting us record it. And I will be in touch within the next few days about your certification.
All right.
Okay, great. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.